The war in Ukraine has started taking new dimensions. Just as the world thought Ukraine has turned the tide, Russia's President Vladimir Putin hit back with his next move, a referendum in captured territories and partial mobilization announced by Russia, which could potentially change the dynamics of this war, or perhaps the European geopolitics as a whole. In the latest, Russian President Putin signed amendments toughening punishment for voluntary surrender and refusal to fight by up to 10 years in prison. The move comes just days after the Russian president ordered a partial mobilization. A separate law signed on Saturday facilitates access to Russian citizenship for foreigners who enlist in the Russian army. This follows a mobilization designed to increase the ranks of the Russian army. Many Russians were already furious over the announcement of partial mobilization. The anger continues to simmer on the streets of Russia. These are the visuals from central Moscow, where the police rushed in to crack down on protesters. About 100 demonstrators were arrested. Meanwhile, on the streets of Kiev, up to 100 people from Mariupol gathered to protest against the Kremlin-organized referendum being held in their hometown over the possibility of a Russian annexation. Covered in Ukrainian flags with posters reading "Mariupol is Ukraine," people who fled their city came to the square near the refugee center.
Але я розумію людей, до яких приходять люди з автоматами, ось і від них вимагають цього голосування. Ось я вважаю, що людям потрібно зберегти своє життя, ось і зробити те, що потрібно на даний момент. Якщо їх заставлятимуть ставити якусь там навіть галочку, це фіксійно, хай вони ставлять, тому що перш за все це життя. Ми все ж таки деокупуємо цю територію, Маріуполь буде Україна.
This comes even as residents in Mariupol cast their votes on the second day of referendums. The referendums have been condemned by Ukraine and the West, along with the UN, as illegitimate. Russia, however, maintains that the referendums offer an opportunity for people in the region to express their view. The residents of the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics who fled the conflict zone to the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don also cast their votes in the referendum on joining Russia.
Для меня референдум – огромный праздник. Наконец-то Донецк великомучественный ждался, что война наконец-то закончится. И мы очень верим России. Спасибо Владимиру Владимировичу. Он поддерживал нас все эти годы как мог. И мы очень рады, что эта война скоро закончится. Спасибо большое. Мы за мир.
Voting in the provinces of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and parts of Zaporizhia, representing about 15% of Ukrainian territories, due to run till Tuesday. The formal annexation of these territories could give Russia quite a lot of power. And for more analysis about what's happening in Ukraine as of now, we are now being joined by retired Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant, who is a defense expert at the Baltic Security Foundation. He joins us from Kiev. Colonel Grant, welcome to WION. Thanks for joining us on this broadcast. My first question, Ukrainians are reporting that armed soldiers have been going door to door, getting people to vote on whether 4 Moscow-controlled regions in Ukraine should formally join Russia. What can you tell us about this?
Well, that is exactly what is happening. I mean, basically, there would be a very low turnout for many obvious reasons. People don't want to vote. So they're going around house to house with voting forms and armed soldiers and basically forcing people to vote. And as you said previously, they're allowing people to vote who now are inside Russia, which of course is complete nonsense if you think about it, because if you're going to allow people to vote from inside Russia, then also the people who are inside Kiev and refugees in other countries, Latvia, Germany, Poland, should also be allowed to vote, so that you actually get a balanced and fair vote. So this is not going to be fair in any way, shape or form. But you also said that this gives Putin more power. I'm not sure that's true. I think that the West is not going to accept this vote at all, because it's so far one-sided. It's unbelievable.
Right. Colonel, if I may interrupt right there, you're saying that, it is illegitimate. That is something the UN, along with the West, has said, that this referendum is completely illegitimate. Yet you're saying people in Russia, in these regions, are being forced to vote. So my question is, what is the legal framework that allows Russia to do this, and will it be able to go ahead with this referendum? What happens then?
There is no legal framework for Russia to do this. It's just power and force. So Russia is doing it because it's already annexed these territories. And so because it has power there, it can force a vote to try and create legitimacy. And actually what Putin wants is legitimacy inside Russia. He knows he's not going to get legitimacy outside of Russia, but it's inside, so that he can then claim that the war and what he's doing in these regions is legitimate, which of course at the moment it's not and never will be. But this is about appearances for Putin, not about anything else.
Right. Colonel, Russia has also announced the replacement of its highest-ranking general in charge of logistics amid what it calls a mobilization, a partial mobilization drive. You just said for Putin this is all about optics. What is Vladimir Putin's end game with this recent tactic?
Well, the end game is to at least hold on to what he's got on the battlefield. Which is why he's gone for this mobilization and trying. He says 300,000. I believe that he will actually try and find more people than 300,000, and that 300,000 is optics just for Russia. But whatever, the end game is he knows that he is being pushed back. He's being pushed back in Kharkiv area, and now he's being pushed back in Kherson, and the troops are becoming surrounded in Kherson area. So he's got to put troops onto the front line to hold it, because if he loses much more ground, then he loses legitimacy inside of Russia.
Would you say this is a tactic? Right. Would you say this is a tactic to avoid losing face?
Oh, absolutely. Losing face and losing position and being, pushed out of a sixth floor window. I mean, let's be quite clear. He's on dodgy ground at the moment, although a large amount of the population still supports what he's doing in Ukraine. But the rich and the powerful know that they're losing money, and they're losing their position, and they're losing all their wondrous times to go to Cannes and enjoy themselves abroad.
Right. Colonel, thank you so much for your perspective, and thanks for joining us from Ukraine. We'll continue to tag this story, of course.
Not at all. Thank you very much for asking.
Now, for the Russian side of things and another perspective, we're also being joined now by Fred Weir from Moscow. He is also a Russian affairs expert. Fred, I wanted to get your perspective on this as well. Nearly 1,500 anti-war protesters have been detained across Russia since Wednesday, with some directly conscripted into the military, and this according to a monitoring group. The punishment in Russia for refusing the draft is now 15 years in jail. What does this say about Russia's new tactic in this war?
I think they're getting very serious about prosecuting the war, and they're doubling down. It's I think preparations for a new, not just to bring more troops in, because they've been fighting with about 200,000 men since February, and these are volunteers, contract soldiers, and separatist militias. So I think the idea is to bring in the regular army. And one of the reasons for this referendum, and I agree with your previous guest, it is completely illegitimate under international law. There are no questions about that, but Russia is kind of off the reservation now, and they are doing it their way. And one of the reasons is to be able to use the regular army and to tell the Russian people that they're defending the state borders of Russia. So this is what it's about.
Right, Fred, the referendums have, as you pointed out, been condemned by Ukraine, the West and the UN. They've been called illegitimate across multiple forums. Will Russia successfully go ahead with them? What happens then? Where is this war headed, essentially?
Well, the referendums are now well underway. So, by Monday, they'll be over. And I guess within a very short period of time, the legal acrobatics of these territories requesting to join the Russian Federation and the State Duma and the Russian government embracing that That will take maybe a couple of weeks, after which Russia will regard those territories as Russian territory. So that is pretty much done and down.
Right.
I think.
We also saw NATO promise more help to Ukraine in response to what it calls sham votes with respect to this referendum. Do you see this condemnation of Russia getting any real traction on ground? Because we saw how ineffective sanctions were in deterring Russian aggression.
No, I think Russia is set on its course, and the Russian. I mean, this partial mobilization has intensified unease among Russians. I feel it myself. I know that the war is getting closer. It's a cold breath on people's backs, which they did not feel for the previous 7 months because they were kind of insulated from it, most families anyway. Right. Now it's getting closer, and it is a more of a political reality within Russia, but I don't think it's going to change either the social mood, which is kind of at least tepidly pro-war, or the resolution of the Russian government to prosecute it to the fullest. The question is, what are the dynamics on the battlefield going to be? I think it's not just that there's probably not soon, but by January, at the depth of winter, when the ground is hard, the Russians will launch offensives. Right. And they will also change the tactics and go after Ukrainian infrastructure much more comprehensively than before. I mean, the electrical grid, I mean, the bridges over the Dnieper River, the train system. I think that they will get much more serious tactically as well as in terms of numbers of troops.
Right, Fred, I'm afraid we're running out of time now. Thank you so much for all those inputs, and thanks for joining us on this broadcast.
Thank you.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.